Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Cameroon's president heads to Nigeria to meet with his counterpart there. Top of the agenda for talks between Paul Biya and Muhammadu Buhari is security in the battle against Boko Haram. Also, on World Press Freedom Day, Human Rights Watch highlights the particular difficulties faced by journalists in Somalia. We meet one man there who continues to report despite the dangers and intimidation. And we head to Dak'Art for the grand opening of the Dak'Art Contemporary Arts Festival. For over 2 decades now, it's been a platform to display and celebrate African culture and creativity. Well, Cameroon's president's headed to Nigeria on Tuesday on a 2-day visit that's likely to focus on the country's shared security concerns. Paul Biya arrived in Abuja. That follows his Nigerian counterpart, Muhammadu Buhari's visit to Cameroon last July. The two leaders are collaborating closely in the battle against Boko Haram insurgents who've increasingly carried out cross-border attacks from Nigeria's northeast. Well, Chika Odua joins us with more from Abuja. Chika, so what is likely to be top of that shared agenda for Buhari and Biya?
Well, the Cameroonian president came to Nigeria at the invitation of President Buhari. He landed this morning at 11 o'clock and was received by the vice president, Mr. Yemi Osinbajo. And at the top of the agenda, of course, is the Boko Haram menace. And of course, both of these countries have dealt with this insurgency being enacted by Boko Haram for the past 7 years now. And President Buhari of Nigeria did say that his administration has squashed Boko Haram, that what remains are just a few suicide attacks. But interestingly, in northwestern Cameroon, attacks are still continuing. So while we've seen attacks decreasing in northeastern Nigeria, in northwestern Cameroon, we're seeing attacks, especially in IDP camps, continuing. And what we're seeing is Boko Haram members actually entering the IDP camps disguised as refugees. And once they get in, they launch all manners of attacks. So this is, of course, what is set on the agenda. We know that Cameroon is already collaborating with the U.S. military as far as getting intelligence. The U.S. military has set up drones, and some of these drones, what will be shared between Nigeria and Cameroon as far as what intelligence that these drones can procure on any information about Boko Haram. So, of course, this will be at the top of the agenda between the two heads of state.
So are there any other mutual security issues besides Boko Haram on the table?
Well, crime is always an issue between these two countries. Now, Cameroon and Nigeria have shared a long history together, and throughout this history, they have had some periods of discord. Of course, we know that just 10 years ago, there was a land dispute, the Bakassi land dispute. But now what's happening are attacks by herdsmen within Nigeria. And it's getting worse and worse as we see herdsmen moving down to the south where they clash with farmers. And there are some security analysts in Nigeria who believe that some of these herdsmen are actually calling for their counterparts in Cameroon, actually calling them to come along and to wreak havoc in villages in southern Nigeria. So this is also an issue of discussion. Besides security, there's also the economic issues. These two countries share so much in trade, and actually 22.6% of Cameroonians' imports come from Nigeria. So that's obviously a huge issue, trying to make sure that economic partnership can continue between the two countries.
Thanks very much. Chika Odua there for us in Abuja. Now, the rescue of a 6-month-old baby girl has raised hopes that more survivors might still be found in the wreckage of a collapsed building in Nairobi. Delerin Seisi Wasike was found unharmed in a wash basin on Tuesday morning. Rescuers say that furniture stopped rubble from falling on her and allowed enough airflow for her to survive. The death toll from last Friday's disaster stands at least 23, and dozens of people are still missing. The baby's mother was amongst the victims. But as rescue efforts continue, the fathers thanked those who returned his daughter to him and urged others to stay positive.
We should take heart that rescues are being carried out. The government is in control, continuing its efforts. We should not judge whether the operations are slow-going or not. Because if they went quickly, my child would not have been found.
Well, Tuesday marks World Press Freedom Day. It comes amidst tough times for some journalists. Human Rights Watch has released a new report highlighting the particular dangers faced by those reporting in Somalia. There's Shabaab extremists who often target journalists, and the government's also come in for criticism for trying to affect media coverage. Despite the dangers, many try to keep at it. Mary Colin Bell tells us more.
Setting off to work isn't easy for Munasa Mohamed Abdi. His job puts him at risk. A reporter for Good Jug Radio, based in Mogadishu, he says he feels like he is a walking target as soon as he steps out of his door. He doesn't trust anyone, not even his neighbours, and before getting in his car, he checks for explosives. At work, threats often push Munasa to self-censor.
I often have problems when I'm in the middle of reporting on something. And even when I try to modify the story to avoid issues, there's always someone who isn't happy because my impartiality conflicts with their interests. So I have to face their anger. Sometimes we receive phone calls and they threaten us. It's very shocking.
Somali journalists are often threatened, and 10 have been killed since 2014. Police have been accused of failing to investigate or protect reporters. Despite al-Shabaab being pushed out of Mogadishu in 2011, the militants still carry out numerous attacks. Munasa narrowly survived one at the beginning of the year.
I remember one time being very afraid. A suicide bomber got into a journalist meeting. Suddenly there was a wave of panic in the crowd, and several of us jumped over a fence to escape. All the journalists survived, but the attacker and a waiter were killed instantly.
With elections set to take place this year, the role of the media will be all the more important. The government has also come under scrutiny for its treatment of journalists. Human Rights Watch has accused state security forces of threatening, harassing and attacking reporters.
Devastating drought in Zimbabwe has forced it to put its wild animals up for sale. The Parks Authority there has offered to hand its charges off to nationals as it struggles with the critical water shortage. Conservation isn't the only area that's been put in jeopardy. 4 million people are thought to be struggling to get enough to eat because of the drought.
A cry for help. Zimbabwe's government is asking for $1.6 billion in aid to tackle the country's malnutrition crisis. After the harshest drought in decades decimated entire harvests, around 4 million Zimbabweans are now facing hunger, over a quarter of the population. The country's southern regions have been the hardest hit, like in Mwenezi, where most crops and cattle didn't survive the drought.
The rains came late. A few plants got through the dry spell, but we don't know if they will make it. I don't think they will.
With the majority of water sources dried up by the drought, women are often forced to walk several kilometers to the nearest wells.
The distance we have to cover to get water is too big. Sometimes we're carrying babies on our backs. I had to leave my 3-month-old baby at home. Look how dirty I am.
Experts are worried the lack of drinking water could now lead to sanitation risks for the most vulnerable communities.
When there is problems with water, then communities tend to use water that is not safe. So communities that are not accessing water will end up having diarrhea, therefore will require treatment.
The government's latest appeal for aid comes just a week after President Robert Mugabe declared a state of emergency. Some critics say the food shortage was partially caused by last decade's land reforms, in which Zimbabwe's government oversaw the eviction of almost 5,000 farmers.
The 12th edition of the Dak'Art Contemporary African Art Show kicked off in the Senegalese capital on Tuesday. Over the next month, artists from all over the world will be exhibiting their work in sites across the city. Our correspondents were there for the grand opening.
Visitors were out in force for the opening of the International Art Exhibition, where 67 artists from 24 different countries are displaying their work. Visual arts, photos and installations, the theme of this year's show is re-enchantment. This life-size dice game questions the education sector in Nigeria.
2, 3, 4, and if I'm landed on heads or tails, somebody just my research efforts go unnoticed because my laboratory equipment is out of date. This year's theme with re-enchantments, it's what are we doing to re-enchant Africa? And I think one of the first things is having these conversations, looking at what's empirical, have empathy for one another, and hopefully we move forward.
For young talent as well as artists of international renown, this biennial is a major event on the continent and one that deserves to be commended.
It's a national treasure that's really worth knowing about and that we must protect because it's what's going to set off a future art trade. People come to see. They need to want to see what's on offer.
These first-comers to the show have been won over.
The exhibition reflects the quality of the evolution of art in Africa, and at the same time, the artist's attachment to everyday life.
I've really been enchanted.
Art enthusiasts have until June 2nd to view the many exhibits taking place for Dak'Art 2016.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, though. Take care and join us again if you can.